Get out! The SUV skidded to a stop on the frozen mountain road, and Brandon Reed's hand closed around Emily Parker's wrist like a trap snapping shut. I said, "Get out, Emily." He shoved her toward the open door so hard her shoulder struck the metal frame, and the German Shepherd puppy in her arms cried out beneath her coat. Brandon snatched her phone, threw her backpack into the snow, and slammed the door. The red taillights blurred through the Montana blizzard, then vanished down the white road, leaving Emily alone with the trembling puppy and the storm. Before we begin, if you believe no one should ever be left behind in the cold, please subscribe and stay with us until the very end of this heartbreaking miracle. Snow erased the mountain road near Whitefish, Montana, turning the pine trees into pale ghosts and the night into a white, breathless wall. Michael Hayes drove through it with both hands steady on the wheel of his old black pickup, the kind of truck that had dents instead of decorations and an engine that sounded like it had survived 3 wars out of pure stubbornness. He was 41, tall and broad through the shoulders, with a hard military build that had softened only at the edges. Short, dark brown hair clipped close, a square jaw shadowed by 2 days of beard, and gray-blue eyes that rarely gave away what they were carrying. Once those eyes had scanned desert rooftops and hostile alleys. Now they watched a mountain road disappear beneath falling snow. Michael had been a Navy SEAL, the kind of man people in town spoke about with lowered voices and respectful distance, but he had also been a K-9 handler, and that was the part of him that still hurt. Men could explain war. Dogs never asked for explanations. They only followed, trusted, and sometimes died with their heads in your lap. Since leaving the service, Michael had lived alone in a cedar cabin beyond the last mailbox, speaking more to his tools and firewood than to people. Folks in Whitefish called him polite but closed off. They were right. Grief had made a quiet fortress of him, and he had been living inside it for years. That night, the cabin lights had flickered twice, then gone dull and weak, forcing him out to check the pump station a few miles down the road. The water line had frozen once before, and if it froze again, the cabin would become little more than a pretty coffin with a roof. Michael had fixed the generator with a wrench, a curse, and the sort of patience only the military and bad plumbing could teach a man. Now he was on his way back, heater rattling, windshield wipers dragging heavy snow aside in tired arcs. The road was empty, too empty, not the peaceful kind either. The kind of empty that made old instincts sit up in his chest. Then the headlights caught something red. It was small, no bigger than a torn ribbon, snagged on the low branch of a pine beside the road. Michael drove past it for half a second before his foot hit the brake. The truck slid, corrected, then stopped with its headlights glaring into the storm. He stared through the windshield. Red did not belong there. Not on that road. Not in that weather. He opened the door, and the wind slapped him hard enough to make a lesser man rethink charity, common sense, and the entire state of Montana. Michael only pulled his coat tighter, grabbed his flashlight and field medical kit from behind the seat, and stepped into the snow. The red strip was cloth, torn from something soft. A scarf, maybe. A sleeve. Beneath it, almost hidden by fresh powder, was a long drag mark leading down toward the roadside ditch. Michael's body changed before his thoughts did. His shoulders lowered, his breathing slowed, and the old operator inside him came awake, grim and focused. He moved down the slope carefully, boots sinking to the ankle, light sweeping over broken branches, churned snow, and then a hand. Pale fingers curled around a leash half buried in ice. Michael dropped to one knee. "Hey!" he called, voice firm but low. "Can you hear me?" The girl lay in the ditch like the storm had tried to fold her into the earth. She looked about 22, maybe younger beneath the frost, with fair skin gone bluish from cold, long brown hair frozen in dark ropes around her face, and a slim, fragile build made smaller by the snow covering her. One ankle was twisted at an ugly angle. Her lips were cracked purple. Snow had gathered on her eyelashes like tiny white feathers. But her arms, God, her arms, were locked around a German Shepherd puppy no older than 3 months, a thin little male with oversized paws, black and tan fur crusted with ice, and amber eyes too alert for a body so weak. The puppy was wrapped inside the girl's own coat, tucked against her chest while she took the cold for both of them. Michael went still. The puppy lifted his head a fraction. He did not bark. He had no strength left for that, but his eyes fixed on Michael with a fierce, trembling suspicion, as if this tiny soldier had been assigned to guard a queen and would do it until death relieved him of command. Michael felt something old split open inside him. For one brutal second, he was not in Montana. He was back in dust and smoke, kneeling beside another dog, a military K-9 named Ranger, whose blood had warmed Michael's gloves while the world shouted around them. Ranger had looked at him the same way near the end, not afraid, only trusting him to know what to do. "Easy, buddy," Michael whispered, his voice rougher now. "I see you." He checked the girl first because triage did not care about heartbreak. Weak pulse, shallow breathing, hypothermia setting in hard. He slid a thermal blanket around her and the pup together, careful not to pry them apart too fast. The girl stirred when he touched her shoulder, a faint sound escaping her throat. Her eyes opened just enough to reveal a soft hazel color dulled by exhaustion and terror. She tried to pull the puppy closer, though her hands barely moved. "No," she breathed. "I'm not taking him from you," Michael said. "I'm getting you both out." The wind screamed over the road as if arguing with him. Michael ignored it. He lifted the puppy first, still wrapped in the coat, then gathered the girl into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of cold bones, wet hair, and stubborn love. Halfway up the ditch, she made a broken sound and her eyes fluttered open again. "Please." Her voice was no more than smoke. "Save him first." Michael stopped for one heartbeat in the storm. The words found the buried place in him, the place marked with Ranger's name, and struck it like a match in a tomb. Then he climbed faster, carrying the girl and the shivering puppy toward the waiting headlights, toward heat, toward whatever truth had left them dying in the snow. Michael Hayes got the truck door open with his shoulder, carrying the girl in both arms while the German Shepherd puppy shivered against his chest inside the torn coat, too weak to fight and too loyal to surrender. The cabin stood ahead of him in the storm like an old wooden ark, half buried in snow, its porch light flickering as if even electricity was afraid of the night. Michael kicked the door shut behind him and moved with the sharp, silent precision of a man who had learned long ago that panic was just another enemy trying to take command. He laid the girl on the narrow bed near the stone fireplace, then set the puppy beside her, wrapped in the coat she had sacrificed. The girl was young, early 20s at most, slim in a way that looked more worn down than delicate, with long brown hair plastered damply against her cheeks, fair skin drained almost gray by cold, and lashes trembling with frost. Even unconscious, one hand twitched toward the puppy, as if some part of her refused to leave him unguarded. "I've got him," Michael said, though he did not know whether she could hear. "I've got you both." He built the fire fast, feeding dry pine into the hearth until orange light climbed the walls and threw shadows over the old Navy photographs he never looked at directly. Then he worked. Not frantically, never frantically. He cut away the girl's soaked outer sleeve where it had frozen stiff, wrapped her in dry thermal blankets, checked her pulse again, checked her breathing, checked her pupils. Her ankle was badly twisted but not broken as far as he could tell, swollen under the wet sock and already turning dark near the bone. He braced it with a folded towel and a strip of clean cloth, then slid another blanket beneath her knees to ease the strain. The puppy he handled next, though the little dog's amber eyes tracked every movement with exhausted suspicion. He was about 3 months old, black and tan with paws too large for his thin body, ribs faint beneath the frozen fur, ears not fully upright yet but trying, like tiny flags after a battle. Michael dried him with an old towel, warmed him slowly near the hearth, and checked for wounds. No broken bones, no bleeding. Just cold, hunger, fear, and a devotion too big for his small body. "You're a stubborn little soldier," Michael muttered. The puppy answered with a tiny breath that might have been a growl if he had any strength left, and despite himself, Michael almost smiled. The sound hurt. Smiling had become an old hinge in him, one that complained whenever used. The girl woke just before dawn with a strangled gasp. Her eyes flew open, wide and hazel, glassy with terror. She jerked upright too fast, cried out at the pain in her ankle, and clawed at the blanket as if expecting hands to grab her. The puppy, who had been sleeping in a curled comma beside the hearth, lifted his head at once. "Easy," Michael said from the chair across the room. He had stayed there all night, boots on, arms folded, close enough to help and far enough not to frighten her. "You're safe. You're in my cabin. I found you off the North Road." She stared at him as if safety were a trick word in a language she no longer trusted. Her gaze moved over him, the broad shoulders, the short military haircut, the weathered face, the gray-blue eyes that did not flinch. Michael knew what he looked like to people. Too large, too quiet, a man built like a locked door. So he did not step closer. He did not reach for her. He only nodded toward the hearth. "Your dog's there. He's alive." The change in her face was immediate, painful, almost holy. She twisted toward the fire. "Scout?" The puppy heard the name and tried to stand. His legs failed him once, then twice, but on the third try he wobbled across the rug, toenails clicking weakly on the floorboards, and dragged himself to the bed. The girl pulled him into her arms with a sob she tried to swallow. Michael looked away, because some moments were private even when they happened in plain sight. "Where am I?" she whispered. "A few miles outside Whitefish," Michael said. "My name is Michael Hayes. I'm not going to hurt you." She tightened around the puppy. "People say that." "They do," he agreed. "Sometimes they lie." That got her attention. Her eyes flicked back to him, wary and confused. Michael stood slowly, crossed to the stove instead of toward her, and ladled chicken broth into a bowl. He was careful to keep his movements ordinary. A man making soup was less frightening than a man standing watch. He put the bowl on the small table beside the bed and stepped back again. Warm broth, small sips. You take too much too fast, your stomach will fight you. Same with water. She looked at the bowl, then at him. "What do you want?" The question came out flat, practiced, and old. It did not belong in a 22-year-old mouth. Michael felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "Nothing." She did not believe him. He could see it clearly. She looked at kindness the way a trapped animal looked at bait. "I don't have money," she said. "Didn't ask." "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask that either." "Then why?" Michael glanced at Scout, who had placed his narrow body between the girl and the room despite barely being able to keep his eyes open. "Because leaving someone to die in a ditch is a poor way to be human." She stared at him for a long time. Outside, the storm softened against the windows, no longer screaming, only breathing hard like a beast tired from hunting. The cabin was plain but clean. Split logs stacked beside the fireplace, a patched leather couch, a table scarred by tools and coffee rings, a rack of winter coats by the door, and on the mantel a folded American flag in a triangular case beside a tarnished K9 collar with the name Ranger stamped into the metal plate. Her eyes found it. Michael saw the question rise in her face, but she did not ask. Good, he thought. He was not ready to answer. Scout, however, had other plans. After a few minutes, the puppy eased out of her arms and limped toward Michael's boots. The girl sucked in a sharp breath as if she expected Michael to kick him away. Michael did not move. Scout sniffed the leather, then the hem of Michael's worn jeans, then sat down directly on his left boot with the solemn authority of a judge claiming a courthouse. Michael looked down at him. The puppy looked back up. Something passed between them, absurd and sacred. "That so?" Michael murmured. Scout sighed, folded himself clumsily, and rested his chin on the boot. The girl watched with wet eyes, astonished by her own dog's betrayal or wisdom. It was hard to tell which. "He doesn't like men," she said. "A smart dog," Michael replied. For the first time, a tiny crack of expression crossed her face. Not a smile, but the ghost of one peeking around a locked door. It vanished quickly. "He bit someone once," she said, then went pale, as though the memory had stepped too close. Michael did not chase it. He picked up the broth bowl and offered it again from a distance. "Drink." Hours passed in small, careful pieces. The girl drank broth. Scout drank water from a tin bowl and then fell asleep with one paw touching her blanket. Michael checked the fire, checked her ankle, checked the road report on his old radio, and said very little. Silence, he had learned, could be a bandage if a man knew how not to stuff it with himself. Near noon, sunlight tried and failed to push through the storm clouds. The girl sat with her back against the headboard, face less blue now, though fear still lived under her skin like a second pulse. "Emily," she said suddenly. Michael looked up from tightening the wrap around her ankle. "Ma'am?" "My name, it's Emily Parker." She swallowed. "I'm 22. Michael nodded once, giving the name the respect of a document signed in court. "Emily Parker." He looked down at the puppy. "And he's Scout?" Her fingers moved into the fur behind Scout's ears. "He's all I have." Michael heard what she did not say. All I was allowed to keep, all that did not leave, all that loved me without conditions. "He did his job last night," Michael said. "So did you." Emily's eyes filled, but she forced the tears back with a discipline that looked learned the hard way. Michael finished securing the ankle wrap and sat back. "Emily, I need to ask one thing. Not the whole story. Just enough to know whether somebody is still looking to hurt you. How did you end up in that ditch?" The cabin seemed to grow quieter. Even Scout opened his eyes. Emily's hand tightened around the blanket until her knuckles paled. She looked toward the window, where snow pressed against the glass like a secret trying to get in. Her lips parted, closed, then parted again. "I don't remember enough," she said at last, voice shaking but honest, "to say it right." Michael studied her for a moment, then gave one slow nod. He had seen men come back from explosions speaking in fragments, seen survivors hold truth in their mouths like broken glass. You did not force a person to bleed faster just because you wanted the story. "Then don't," he said. "Not yet." He rose, put another log on the fire, and let the room return to warmth and quiet. Some truths, he knew, had to crawl out of the dark on their own, the same way the wounded people crawled through snow. By the next morning, the storm had loosened its jaws, leaving Whitefish buried under a clean white silence that made every evil thing look forgiven. Michael Hayes had been awake since before dawn, sitting at the small kitchen table with a mug of black coffee cooling between his hands and the old radio muttering road closures in a tired voice. Emily Parker slept in the bed near the fireplace, one hand hanging over the blanket so Scout could keep his nose pressed against her fingers. The German Shepherd puppy looked stronger than the night before, though only slightly. His black and tan fur had dried into soft, uneven tufts. His oversized paws twitched in dreams, and every few minutes his amber eyes opened to make sure Emily had not vanished. Michael had seen grown soldiers sleep less faithfully beside wounded friends. He had also seen fear turn into memory, and memory into truth, and he knew the next hours would not be kind to the girl in his cabin. The world outside was too loud, even when covered in snow. Sooner or later, it always came knocking. It came first through his phone. Signal was weak in the mountains, but one message pushed through from his nearest neighbor, a retired lineman named Walt Granger, a barrel-chested widower in his late 60s with a white beard, red cheeks, and the habit of treating gossip like weather reports. Not always welcome, but worth knowing before it hit your roof. The message read, "Mike, you seeing this? Missing girl. Dog 2. Local pages blowing up." Michael opened the link. A photo filled the screen. Emily, smiling in sunlight beside Scout when the puppy was younger and rounder, his ears flopped sideways like he had borrowed them from a larger dog. She looked different there. Same brown hair, same fair skin, same hazel eyes, but unbroken in a way that made Michael's chest tighten. Beside the photo was a post from a man named Brandon Reed. Michael read it once, then again, slower. My girlfriend, Emily Parker, disappeared last night after a difficult emotional episode during our drive near Whitefish. She ran from the vehicle with her puppy, Scout. I searched as long as I could before conditions became impossible. Emily has been struggling recently and may be confused or afraid. If anyone sees her, please contact me or local authorities. I just want to bring her home safe. Below the words was another photo. Brandon Reed, facing a phone camera, filmed outside what looked like the sheriff's substation, snow dusting the shoulders of his expensive navy coat. He was 29 or 30, tall in that polished way men looked when they had never hauled fence posts, with sandy blonde hair combed neatly back, clean-shaven cheeks, green eyes bright with carefully measured worry, and a face handsome enough to be believed before he ever opened his mouth. His voice in the video was soft, breaking in all the right places. "Emily hasn't been herself," Brandon said, eyes shining red but not quite wet. "She gets overwhelmed. She loves that dog, and I'm afraid she did something reckless trying to prove a point. Please, if she sees this, Em, baby, I'm not mad. I just want you home." Michael set the phone face down on the table. A slow, cold anger moved through him, disciplined but awake. He knew performance when he saw it. Men lied differently under pressure. Some lied with too many details, some with too few. Brandon lied like a man who had rehearsed grief in the mirror and found his best angle. Behind him, the bed creaked. Emily was awake. She had pushed herself up on one elbow, hair loose around her pale face, the blanket slipping from one shoulder. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse from cold and sleep. Michael looked at her, then at the phone. He could have hidden it from her for another hour, maybe another day, but shelter built on half-truths was still a cage. "There's a post online," he said, "about you." Emily's fingers tightened in Scout's fur. "From who?" Michael did not answer with his mouth. He turned the phone around and slid it across the table, stopping it well before the edge of the bed so she would have to choose whether to reach for it. Emily stared at the screen. The color left her face so quickly it seemed the room had stolen it. She reached out, but her hand shook too hard to take the phone cleanly. The metal cup beside the bed tipped under her elbow, spilling water across the floorboards. Scout woke at once. Then Brandon's voice came from the phone, gentle and poisonous as honey left too long in the sun. "Em, baby, I'm not mad." Scout's reaction was instant. His small body stiffened, hackles rising along his thin back. A weak growl crawled out of him, broken but fierce, and he tried to stand between Emily and the sound. Emily pressed the phone away like it had burned her. "Turn it off," she whispered. Michael did. The cabin fell quiet except for the hiss of the fire and the soft dripping of water from the tipped cup. Emily's breathing came fast. She looked not merely frightened, but ashamed of being frightened, which told Michael more than any confession could have. "He said I ran," she said. "Did you?" Michael asked, not accusing, only steady. Emily looked at him sharply, expecting doubt, but found none. That seemed to frighten her almost as much. "I don't know," she said at first, then squeezed her eyes shut. No, I didn't. I remember his hand on my wrist." Her own hand moved to the place where faint bruises had begun to bloom beneath the skin, thumb-shaped shadows yellowing at the edge. "We stopped somewhere. Bright lights, gas pumps. Scout was whining because Brandon was angry. I told him I wanted my phone back. He smiled at the cashier like everything was normal." Her voice thinned. "He always did that. Smiled where people could see." Michael said nothing. Silence made room. Questions, too many of them, could trample fragile ground. Emily swallowed and went on, each sentence pulled from her like a thread caught in thorns. "He used to call it protecting me, checking my messages, telling me which friends were bad for me. He said my cousin Jenna filled my head with drama, so I stopped calling her. He said my boss at the animal rescue liked me too much, so I quit taking extra shifts. He said I got confused when too many people talked to me." A small, humorless laugh broke from her. After a while, I stopped knowing whether I was confused or just tired. Her eyes drifted toward Scout. Scout hated him from the start. Brandon said dogs could sense instability. He meant mine. The puppy gave another low growl, as if objecting to the insult even now. Michael leaned back in his chair. His face stayed calm, but inside, old maps rearranged themselves. Isolation, control, public charm, private pressure. A story planted before the victim could speak. None of it was random. It had the shape of an ambush. Emily rubbed both hands over her face and more pieces returned, cruel little birds finding their way back to the nest. "There was red light," she whispered. "Tail lights. I was on the road. Scout was crying. My phone. He took my phone. Or maybe it fell. No, he took it. He said nobody would believe me if I came back with another story." She opened her eyes, suddenly desperate. "I don't know what story he meant. There was something else before the drive. Papers. A bank envelope. My mother's house." The words seemed to hurt her. "I found my name on something I never signed." Michael's gaze sharpened, but he kept his voice even. "You don't have to put it all together today." "But he already is," she said, looking at the phone as if Brandon might climb out of it. "He's putting it together for me." That was the first fully true thing she had said since waking, and Michael respected it. Brandon was not only searching for Emily, he was framing the battlefield. If the town believed she was unstable, every word she later spoke would arrive already wounded. If they believed Michael was some dangerous hermit veteran who had taken her in, then the cabin itself could be made to look like a prison instead of a refuge. It was clever. Too clever for panic. Michael stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the road lay white and untouched, but he knew better than to trust clean snow. Snow covered tracks. It did not erase what made them. "Emily," he said, turning back, "I'm not going to call him. I'm not going to hand you to him, but I need you to understand something. A man like that tells his version first because he's afraid of yours." Emily looked at him, tears standing bright but unshed. What if his sounds better? Michael's expression did not soften, but his voice did. Lies often do at first. They come dressed for church. Scout limped off the bed then, surprising them both, and made his way to Michael's boots. He stood there trembling, not lying down this time, but facing the door as if he expected Brandon to appear in the storm. Michael looked from the puppy to Emily. The past had sent him a girl with frost in her hair and a dog too small for the war he had joined. He did not yet know who had left them in that ditch, not in the way courts and sheriffs required knowing, but his instincts had already marked the ground. Everything about Brandon Reed's grief smelled staged. Everything about Emily's fear looked earned. And in Michael's old life, when a thing looked like an ambush, a man did not walk blindly into it. He studied the terrain, counted the exits, and waited for the enemy to make one more mistake. Michael left the cabin just after noon, when the sky had turned the color of old pewter and the storm had weakened into drifting flakes that moved like tired ashes. He did not like leaving Emily alone, not with her ankle swollen, her hands still shaking when Brandon's name came too close, and Scout too small to be much more than a brave heartbeat wrapped in fur. So, before he stepped out, he called Walt Granger, who arrived 20 minutes later in a rust-spotted green Ford with a snowplow blade bolted to the front and a thermos of coffee tucked under one arm like a sacred object. Walt was 68, broad as a barn door, with a thick white beard, wind-burned cheeks, pale blue eyes, and the kind of slow, decent manner that made him seem harmless until a man noticed the old hunting rifle in the rack behind his seat. He had buried his wife 6 winters earlier and had since made a religion of checking on neighbors who pretended they did not need checking on. When Walt stepped into the cabin, he took one look at Emily sitting near the fire, pale and wary with Scout pressed against her leg, and softened so completely he looked almost embarrassed by his own face. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his wool cap as if she were a queen receiving him in a palace instead of a frightened girl wrapped in Michael's spare blanket. Michael did not tell Walt everything. He only said, "No one comes in unless I bring them. No one gets near her." Walt's face changed then. the softness setting into granite. "Understood." Emily watched the exchange without speaking, but her shoulders eased a fraction when Walt pulled a chair near the door instead of near her, opened his thermos, and began complaining quietly to Scout about how Montana used to have proper winters before everyone got dramatic about weather. Scout, suspicious but exhausted, accepted this insult to the climate with half-closed eyes. Michael drove out with his field kit, his phone, 2 clean evidence bags from an old search-and-rescue course, and the cold knowledge that every mile of fresh snow might erase what Brandon Reed had tried to leave behind. The North Road looked different in daylight. Last night it had been a white throat swallowing everything. Now it was a wounded page, creased with tire tracks, wind-scoured patches, and places where the ditch fell away more sharply than a driver would guess in a storm. Michael parked where he had seen the red strip of cloth. He did not rush down. First, he photographed the road from 4 angles, then the branch, then the shallow slide path where a body had gone over the edge. He dropped a small orange marker beside each sign he found, because the old training never truly left. Document before touching, observe before deciding. Do not let anger make you sloppy. Near the ditch, half buried under a crust of ice, he found Emily's backpack. It was a cheap canvas thing, dark blue with one strap torn loose, lying upside down as if it had been thrown rather than dropped. Around it, the snow held small, miserable pieces of a life interrupted. A cracked lip balm, a paperback novel swollen from wet, a single gray sock, a folded photograph sealed in a plastic sleeve. Michael picked up the photograph last. It showed a younger Emily standing beside a woman in her 50s with kind hazel eyes and silver-brown hair, both of them in front of a modest white house with yellow shutters. The older woman had one arm around Emily's shoulders and the other hand shading her eyes from the sun. On the back, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Mom and me, Cedar Lane, before the roses died." Michael stared at it longer than he meant to. Then he slid it into a separate dry bag. A few feet farther down, caught beneath a glazed shelf of ice near a broken root, was a torn piece of brown leather. Michael crouched low. The edge was ragged, not cut. Bitten. 2 small crescent punctures marked the leather where puppy teeth had gone in with all the force a 3-month-old German shepherd could summon. Michael felt the air shift around the piece as if the snow itself had finally spoken. "Good boy, Scout," he murmured. He photographed it in place, marked it, then lifted it carefully into a bag with his gloved hand. Back at the cabin, Emily was awake but quiet, her eyes following him the moment he came through the door. Walt stood from his chair, pretending he had not been singing an old Johnny Cash song under his breath to keep Scout calm. "No trouble," Walt said. "Pup judged me and found me barely tolerable." Michael almost smiled, then held up the sealed bag with the torn leather. "Emily, I need you to look at something. You don't have to touch it." She went still. Scout, who had been dozing beside her wrapped ankle, lifted his head. Michael placed the bag on the table. The reaction came before Emily found words. Scout lurched upright, hackles rising, a growl scraping out of him like a match against stone. He backed toward Emily, then planted himself against her shin, trembling with fury bigger than his body. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. "That's his," she whispered. "Brandon's glove." Her eyes unfocused, memory cutting through fog. "Scout bit him. At the gas station. Brandon squeezed my wrist and Scout bit him." Michael slid the bag away, not wanting the puppy to spend what little strength he had fighting a ghost. "Which gas station?" Emily closed her eyes. "Last one before the road turned up. Sinclair sign. Red dinosaur. There was a woman at the counter with purple glasses." Walt nodded once. "That'll be Hutton's fuel. May Hutton runs it. Built like a knitting needle, talks like a shotgun." May Hutton turned out to be exactly that. The station sat at the edge of town beneath a faded green dinosaur sign, its windows fogged with heat and coffee steam, its parking lot carved into narrow lanes by plowed snow. May was in her early 60s, tall and narrow, with sharp elbows, short iron gray hair, brown skin weathered by decades of Montana wind, and purple cat-eye glasses hanging from a beaded chain. She had the brisk, unsentimental kindness of a woman who had raised 3 sons, buried 1 husband, and learned that fools multiplied when allowed to feel comfortable. When Michael introduced himself, her eyes moved over him, measuring the military posture, the sleepless face, the sealed evidence bag in his hand. "You're the cabin man," she said, "and you're asking about that pretty girl with the scared eyes." Michael did not waste time. "She was here last night with Brandon Reed." May's mouth flattened. "I remember him. Too polished. Men that polished usually want the world to slip off them without leaving prints." "Just see." She led him behind the counter to a small office smelling of burnt coffee, printer ink, and old receipts. The security monitor showed 4 camera angles: pumps, front door, aisle, counter. May rewound the footage with thin fingers that moved faster than her age suggested. "Cameras keep 30 days, she said. "My nephew set it up after some idiot tried stealing jerky and lottery tickets. Smile, thief, you're famous." Then the screen showed Brandon. Michael leaned closer. Brandon entered first, smiling at May with easy charm, his sandy blonde hair neat despite the storm beginning outside, his navy coat clean, his green eyes bright and false. Emily followed with Scout in her arms, shoulders drawn inward, face pale even before the snow had touched her. At the counter, Brandon bought gas, bottled water, and a pack of mints. He laughed at something May said. Anyone watching only that angle would see a pleasant man on a hard-weather night. But the aisle camera told a different story. In the blind space near the windshield fluid, Brandon turned toward Emily. His smile vanished. His hand closed around her wrist hard enough that she bent toward him. Scout twisted in her arms and snapped. Brandon jerked back, face flashing with naked rage before the public mask dropped over it again. On the screen, Emily said something. Brandon leaned close and answered. There was no audio, but Michael did not need it to read fear in the way Emily shrank without stepping away. May said nothing for a long moment. Her purple glasses hung low on her nose. "Well," she said at last, voice quiet now, "that ain't love." She copied the footage to a drive and printed the receipt with timestamp, her jaw set in a hard line. "Tell that girl," May said as she handed it over. "Some of us saw more than he hoped." When Michael returned to the cabin, twilight had begun gathering in the pines. Emily sat by the fire with the photograph of her mother in both hands, Walt having given it to her after Michael called ahead. Her face was wet but calmer, as if grief, unlike fear, at least had the decency to tell the truth. Michael placed the drive and the printed timestamp on the table. "The camera caught him grabbing your wrist," he said. "It caught Scout biting the glove." Emily looked down at the puppy. Scout blinked up at her, solemn and sleepy, unaware that his small teeth had just become the first clean blade against a man's lie. Then Emily's voice came thin and distant. "I found papers in his drawer 2 nights ago. A bank envelope. My name. My mother's house on Cedar Lane. A loan I never signed." Her thumb moved over the photograph. "I told him I was going to the police. He smiled. That was the worst part. Not yelling, not begging, just smiling." She looked at Michael then, and the memory finally found its full sentence. He said, "No one will believe you." Michael stood very still. Outside, snow slid from the roof in a soft, heavy fall. Inside, the pieces settled into place with the dreadful patience of a trap revealed after it had already sprung. Emily had not wandered into the storm. She had been delivered to it. Scout had not merely survived beside her. He had fought for her before anyone else knew there was a war. By late afternoon, the snow outside Michael Hayes's cabin had stopped falling, but the world still looked trapped inside a white coffin, silent and sealed, as if the mountains were holding their breath for whatever came next. Emily Parker sat near the fireplace with Scout curled against her good leg, the photograph of her mother resting on the blanket beside her, and the truth of Brandon Reed settling into her bones like a second winter. Michael had just finished copying the gas station footage onto his own drive when the low growl of an engine rolled up the private road. Scout heard it first. His head lifted, ears struggling upright, and a sound came from his throat that did not belong to a puppy. It was too old, too certain. Emily's face drained. Michael moved to the window without speaking. Through the frost-streaked glass, he saw 3 vehicles coming slowly up the drive: a black SUV too clean for a mountain road, a county sheriff's cruiser, and a silver sedan with rental plates. Brandon stepped out of the SUV first. He wore an expensive charcoal overcoat, dark gloves, and polished boots that had no business in real snow. His sandy blonde hair was combed back with careful disorder, just messy enough to look like worry had touched it but not ruined it. His face was pale, handsome, and tired in the exact amount a camera would forgive. Beside him stood a lean man in his late 40s with a narrow face, thinning black hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a gray wool suit under a long coat. He carried a leather briefcase and the pinched expression of a lawyer who considered compassion an inefficient use of time. This was Calvin Merritt, though Michael did not know the name yet, the sort of attorney who spoke softly because he expected money to raise its voice for him. From the cruiser stepped Deputy Sarah Collins, a woman in her mid-30s, tall and athletic, with copper-red hair twisted into a tight knot beneath her sheriff's cap, pale, freckled skin reddened by the cold, and steady brown eyes that missed very little. She had the tired patience of someone who had answered too many domestic calls where the truth hid behind good furniture and polite smiles. A small scar crossed the left side of her chin, white against her skin. Later, Michael would learn it came from a drunken father she had arrested in her first year on patrol, a night that taught her never to trust the calmest voice in the room too quickly. Michael opened the door before they knocked, keeping his body in the frame and the storm air outside. Brandon's eyes moved past him, searching the room. For half a second, when he saw Emily alive near the fire, something ugly flashed beneath his grief. Shock first, then rage, quick as a snake under leaves. Then it vanished, replaced by trembling relief. "Emily," he breathed. "Oh my God!" Emily shrank so sharply that Scout stumbled to his feet and planted himself between her and the door. Michael did not turn around. "That's far enough." Brandon looked wounded by the words. "I'm here for my girlfriend." Calvin Merritt stepped forward, opening his briefcase just enough to display papers without quite handing them over. "Mr. Hayes, my client has filed a missing person report and requested a welfare check. Given Ms. Parker's vulnerable mental state and your refusal to contact authorities immediately, we have serious concerns." Deputy Collins glanced at Michael, then passed him toward Emily. "Mr. Hayes, I need to see her and hear from her directly." "You can," Michael said. "He stays outside." Brandon gave a soft, pained laugh. "You hear that? He's controlling who can see her. Emily, baby, tell them you're scared. It's okay. I'm here now." The word baby hit Emily like a hand. Her fingers dug into the blanket. In her mind, the cabin bent and became the SUV again, became the gas station aisle, became every room where Brandon had lowered his voice and made her feel smaller than the furniture. He did not need to shout. He never had. His power had always been dressed in concern. "You're confused, Em. You're emotional. Let me handle this. You make things worse when you talk." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but her body remembered silence the way a beaten drum remembers the stick. Sarah Collins noticed. Her gaze moved from Emily's white knuckles to Scout's raised hackles, then to Brandon's too perfect sorrow. "Mr. Reed," Sarah said, "stay by your vehicle." Brandon's mouth tightened, only a flicker. "Deputy, with respect, by your vehicle." Something in Sarah's tone left no room for respect to disguise disobedience. Michael stepped aside just enough to let Sarah enter. She came in slowly, removing her gloves, making herself smaller with intention. "Emily Parker?" Emily nodded once. "I'm Deputy Collins. Sarah, if that helps, are you here willingly?" Emily's eyes darted to Brandon outside, visible through the open doorway. Brandon lifted one gloved hand, palm to his heart, as if pledging love before an invisible jury. Emily began to shake. Scout could not bear it. With a sudden, ragged burst of strength, the puppy launched himself off the rug and bolted toward the door. Michael reached, but Scout was faster than fear and smaller than a mistake. He shot between Michael's boots down the porch step and straight at Brandon. The puppy's growl tore itself raw as he seized Brandon's pant leg near the shin. Not hard enough to injure badly, but hard enough to remember. Brandon's mask cracked. "Get off me!" he snapped, and his polished boot jerked forward in a sharp reflexive kick, catching Scout just enough to knock the puppy sideways into the snow. Emily cried out. Michael was already moving, but Sarah moved too, one hand out. "Stop!" The word cut through the yard. Brandon froze, breathing hard, the grief gone from his face and something colder standing in its place. Scout scrambled up, limping but defiant, and Michael scooped him before the puppy could spend his last ounce of bravery on a fool. Emily was sobbing now, not loudly, but with the terrible breathless sound of someone watching the last curtain fall. Sarah's eyes had gone flat. "Mr. Reed," she said, "do not approach the dog, the house, or Miss Parker again unless I tell you to." Calvin Merritt cleared his throat. "Deputy, surely you saw the animal attack my client." Sarah looked at him. "I saw a frightened puppy react to a man he appears to recognize. I also saw your client kick at him." Brandon's face flushed. "It was instinct." "Most things are," Sarah said. "That's why I pay attention to them." Michael carried Scout inside and placed him in Emily's arms. The puppy trembled against her, but his eyes stayed fixed on Brandon through the doorway, fierce and bright. Michael then crossed to the table and gathered the evidence with careful hands: the sealed bag containing the torn glove leather, the printed stills from Hutton's Fuel, the time-stamped copy of the security footage, photographs from the roadside ditch, and the GPS data he had pulled from Scout's collar while Emily slept. The collar itself was blue nylon, scratched and small, with a tiny black tracker clipped near the buckle. Emily had told him, between broken breaths, that Scout had come from Flathead Rescue, where she had fostered him after he was found under a porch during a cold rain. Because he had slipped a fence twice as a younger pup, the rescue had fitted him with the tracker before allowing Emily to foster him. It was a practical little mercy no one had known would become a witness. Michael handed the items to Sarah, not Brandon, not the lawyer. "The camera at Hutton's Fuel shows him grabbing her wrist before the storm," he said. "It shows the dog biting his glove. I found the torn glove piece in the ditch where I found Emily. The GPS track puts Emily and Scout at that location after his vehicle stopped on the North Road. She didn't wander there from town. She was left there." Brandon laughed once, sharp and false. "This is insane. He's a soldier playing detective with a traumatized woman and a dog collar." Sarah did not answer him. She looked through the first still, then the second. Her jaw tightened. She looked at the GPS map on Michael's phone, the red line ending in the same lonely stretch of mountain road where Michael's photos showed the ditch. Finally, she looked at Emily. "Did Brandon leave you there?" Emily's mouth opened. No sound came. Brandon leaned forward despite the warning, voice soft again, poisonous with tenderness. "Careful, Em. You know how you get when you're overwhelmed." Scout growled from her lap. The sound was weak, but it held the room upright. Emily closed her eyes, pressed one hand into Scout's fur, and whispered, "I'm not ready to say it all." Sarah nodded. "That's all right." Then Emily opened her eyes and added, barely louder, "But I don't want to go with him." The cabin seemed to breathe again. Sarah turned to Brandon. "That answers the immediate welfare question." "She's confused," Brandon said. "She's injured," Sarah replied. "There's a difference." Calvin Merritt began speaking about procedure, liability, emotional instability, and unlawful interference, but Sarah lifted one hand without looking at him. "Counselor, you can say all that downtown." Brandon stared at Emily through the doorway, and for one naked second hatred stood where love had been pretending. Emily saw it. So did Michael. More importantly, so did Sarah Collins. The deputy stepped back onto the porch, evidence held tight against her coat. "Mr. Reed," she said, "you came here claiming you wanted to bring her home. Right now, it looks like home may be exactly what she survived." Brandon said nothing. Snow slid from a pine branch and struck the ground with a soft, heavy thud. Inside the cabin, Emily held Scout against her chest as if he were both shield and heartbeat. For the first time since Brandon's voice had crawled out of Michael's phone, someone outside the cabin had seen the crack in the perfect man's face. The county courthouse in Kalispell looked too small to hold so much cold. An old brick building with narrow windows, brass handles polished by anxious hands, and snow piled along the steps like white sandbags before a war. Emily Parker arrived with Michael Hayes on one side and Deputy Sarah Collins on the other, while Scout limped between her boots in a soft blue harness Sarah had borrowed from the sheriff's office K-9 supply room. The puppy was still too thin, still too young, still carrying the storm in his bones, but his amber eyes were awake and fixed forward, as if he understood that this room, not the ditch, was where the real battle had been waiting. Emily wore one of Michael's flannel shirts beneath a borrowed wool coat from Walt Granger's late wife, the sleeves rolled twice over her small wrists. Her brown hair had been combed but not styled, falling over one shoulder in loose waves, and the bruises on her wrist had darkened into ugly thumb-shaped shadows. She felt everyone noticing them, and shame tried to rise in her throat before anger pushed it back down. Michael did not touch her as they walked in. He had learned, with the quiet grace of a man rebuilding his own soul plank by plank, that protection did not always mean standing in front of someone. Sometimes it meant walking close enough that they could stand for themselves. The hearing had been set quickly after Brandon Reed and his lawyer, Calvin Merritt, filed an emergency petition claiming Emily was being influenced by an unstable former soldier. Sarah, after reviewing the evidence from Hutton's Fuel, had brought her own report to the county attorney's office before sunrise. That was how they all ended up in courtroom 2 before Judge Evelyn Mercer, a woman in her late 50s with deep brown skin, silver-threaded black hair cut neatly at her jaw, and eyes so calm they seemed to make noise unnecessary. She had been a public defender before taking the bench, and rumor said she could spot a liar from the way he treated the bailiff. At her right stood Bailiff Roy Decker, a thick-necked man with a shaved head, heavy brows, and the patient weariness of someone who had seen families break apart under fluorescent lights for 20 years. Brandon sat at the front table in a dark suit, his sandy blonde hair perfect, his green eyes dimmed with theatrical pain. He looked like a man wronged by chaos, not a man who had fed someone to a blizzard. Beside him, Calvin Merritt arranged papers with long, dry fingers, every movement precise, every glance sharpened like a letter opener. When Emily entered, Brandon turned just enough for her to see him, not the room, not the judge, her. His mouth softened into the old private shape, the one he used before saying baby, before correcting her memory, before making her apologize for wounds he had left. Emily's legs weakened. Scout pressed his shoulder against her boot. Michael remained behind her, silent and steady, his square jaw set, gray-blue eyes forward. Judge Mercer began by stating the purpose of the hearing. Whether Emily Parker was in immediate danger, whether Michael Hayes had interfered unlawfully, and whether Brandon Reed's petition had merit. Calvin stood first. His voice was smooth as a polished floor and just as easy to slip on. He spoke of concern, trauma, confusion, and military isolation. He described Michael as a heavily trained combat veteran living alone in the mountains, a man who had failed to call Brandon immediately after finding Emily. He described Emily as fragile, emotionally overwhelmed, recently distressed over family property and finances. He did not call her unstable outright. He only walked the word around the room until everyone could smell it. Brandon then stood, one hand over his heart. "I love her," he said, and his voice broke beautifully. "Emily has been struggling. I never wanted this public. I never wanted to embarrass her, but she ran into that storm with Scout, and I thought I had lost them both. Then I find out she's in a cabin with a man no one really knows, a man who won't let me near her." He looked at Emily with shining eyes. "Em, I'm not angry. I just want you safe." Emily's fingers clenched around Scout's leash. For a moment, the courtroom blurred into the inside of Brandon's SUV, the smell of leather, the dashboard glow, his hand around her wrist, the sudden absence of her phone. She heard him again. "No one will believe you." The judge looked down from the bench. "Ms. Parker, I'm going to ask you questions in a moment. You may take your time." Emily nodded, but the nod barely lived. Sarah was called next. She stood straight in her tan uniform, red hair pinned tight, scar on her chin pale beneath the courtroom lights. Her voice carried no drama, which made each fact land harder. She described the welfare check, Brandon's attempt to approach Emily, Scout's reaction, Brandon kicking toward the puppy, Emily's clear statement that she did not want to leave with him, and the evidence gathered afterward. She submitted still photographs from Hutton's Fuel. Brandon smiling at the counter, then Brandon in the aisle gripping Emily's wrist while Scout bit his glove. She submitted the torn leather from the ditch, photographed where Michael had found it under ice. She submitted roadside images showing the drag marks, the backpack, and the location where Emily had been discovered. Finally, she submitted the GPS record from Scout's collar, explaining that Flathead Rescue had placed the tracker on the puppy before Emily fostered him because he had slipped loose twice as a younger dog. The red line on the printed map did not wander from town. It ended on the North Mountain Road where Brandon's vehicle had stopped, then dropped toward the ditch where Michael found Emily and Scout. Calvin objected twice. Judge Mercer overruled him twice. Brandon's face remained composed, but his jaw began to pulse. Then came Emily. She rose slowly, one hand on the table until she trusted her ankle. Scout stood with her, tiny body trembling, and Sarah asked the judge if the dog could remain at Emily's feet. Judge Mercer looked at Scout, then at Emily's white face and said, "The dog may stay." Emily took the chair. Her feet barely reached the floor properly because of the bandaged ankle, and the room seemed too large, the silence too hungry. Brandon watched her with the old gaze, not anger, worse, ownership disguised as patience. "Ms. Parker," Judge Mercer said gently, "did Brandon Reed leave you on the North Road during the storm?" Emily opened her mouth. Nothing came. Her heart slammed so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She wanted to say she was not sure. She wanted to say maybe she had misunderstood. She wanted, with the terrible reflex of the trained and frightened, to make the room easier for the man who had made her life smaller. Behind her, Michael did not move. He did not rescue her from the question. He did not speak her truth for her. He simply stood where she could see him if she turned, broad-shouldered, quiet, scarred by battles he did not advertise, a mountain that had no need to shout at the storm. Scout placed his muzzle on the toe of her boot. The warmth of that small living creature reached her through the leather. Emily looked down at him and remembered the ditch, the snow on his eyelashes, his body shaking inside her coat. She remembered choosing to keep him warm because love, real love, did not ask who was useful first. Then she lifted her head. "He didn't lose me in the storm," she said. Her voice was small, but it did not break. "He chose the storm for me." The courtroom went still. Even Brandon forgot to breathe. Emily continued, each word making room for the next. "He took my phone. He threw out my bag. He knew I had found the bank papers. He knew I was going to report the loan and the forged signature on my mother's house. He drove until there were no lights and no houses, and then he made me get out. Scout bit him because Brandon grabbed me. I didn't run away from him. I was trying to survive him." Brandon stood so fast, his chair scraped backward. "You ungrateful little—" Calvin grabbed his sleeve, but Brandon shook him off, the perfect man peeling apart in strips. "After everything I did for you, that house should have been mine. You would still be nothing without me. You owe me." The words hung there, naked and ugly, no longer dressed as concern. Judge Mercer's eyes hardened. "Mr. Reed, sit down." Brandon pointed toward Emily. "She lies. She gets confused. She—" "Bailiff." Roy Decker moved before Brandon finished. Sarah stepped in from the side, already reaching for her cuffs. Brandon tried to pull back, but the room had changed kingdoms. His charm had no subjects here. Judge Mercer denied his petition, granted an emergency protective order, and referred the evidence for charges including reckless endangerment, financial fraud, forgery, and false reporting. Sarah cuffed Brandon at the wrist he had once used to bruise Emily, and as the metal clicked shut, Scout gave one low growl, not loud, not wild, just final. Emily did not smile. She did not collapse. She only breathed, one long breath that felt like the first honest air her lungs had taken in months. Michael stood behind her, still not touching her, but when she turned, he gave one small nod. It was not victory yet. It was not healing yet. But the lie had fallen in public, and the truth, thin and trembling as a puppy in snow, had stood up and lived. Spring came late to the mountains outside Whitefish, Montana, as if winter had left claw marks in the soil and the earth needed time to forgive. Snow withdrew from the slopes in silver streams, the pines shook loose their white burdens, and the north road where Emily Parker had almost died became, by slow inches, just a road again. Brandon Reed waited in the county custody for trial, his perfect suits replaced by orange cloth and his polished voice now answering to charges instead of cameras. The forged loans were frozen first, then unraveled. The bank acknowledged signatures that were not Emily's. The lien on her mother's little house on Cedar Lane was lifted, and the key to that house came back to her in a padded envelope with an apology letter too stiff to be human. Emily held that key for a long time at Michael Hayes's kitchen table, turning it over in her fingers while Scout, now broader in the chest and less puppy than Promise, slept with his head on her boot. She could have gone back then. Everyone told her so gently. Sarah Collins, still sharp-eyed and copper-haired beneath her deputy's cap, said the protective order was solid. Walt Granger offered to drive the first load of furniture in his plow truck, claiming he needed an excuse to get out of the house before his houseplants started filing complaints. Even May Hutton from the gas station mailed over a box of canned peaches and a note that read, "For a girl who told the truth when it cost something." But Emily did not return to Cedar Lane right away. The house was hers, yes, and that mattered. But home, she was learning, was not only a place returned by paperwork. Sometimes home was a skill you had to grow back in your hands like warmth after frostbite. So she stayed in Whitefish, not in Michael's cabin forever, but near it, renting a small room above Flathead Rescue, the animal shelter where she had once fostered Scout before fear had narrowed her world. The shelter director, Nora Whitcomb, was a compact woman in her early 50s with cropped silver hair, round brown eyes, and forearms strong from lifting dogs who had forgotten people could be gentle. Nora walked with a slight limp from a car accident years ago and spoke to frightened animals in the same tone she used for frightened humans, plain, patient, and without pity, sharp enough to cut. She gave Emily work cleaning kennels, logging medication, walking nervous dogs behind the building, and eventually helping with intake. Healing, Nora told her one morning while a three-legged hound snored under the desk, is mostly doing the next useful thing until your soul catches up. Emily wrote that sentence on a sticky note and kept it inside her coat pocket. Michael began training her and Scout on Saturdays, then Wednesdays too, then whenever Emily had the courage to ask. He did not train them like a soldier breaking recruits. He trained them like a man apologizing to the living for failing the dead. Scout grew into his paws, his black and tan coat thickening, his amber eyes bright with the solemn intelligence Michael had seen in only the best working dogs. His ears stood fully now, proud and ridiculous when the wind caught them, and the scar of that terrible night remained only in the way he checked Emily's face whenever a truck door slammed too hard. Emily changed too, though not all at once. She was still slender, still hazel-eyed, still carried shadows under her smile, but her shoulders no longer folded inward at every loud voice. She learned scent trails and hand signals, learned how wind carried human smell through trees, learned to trust Scout's nose when her own fear wanted to argue. Michael taught her how to pack a field bag, how to read snow crust, how to breathe before panic could climb into the driver's seat. He never became her lover. The story did not need that, and neither did she. He became something quieter and rarer. The steady figure at the edge of the training field. The man who never grabbed the leash from her hand. The one who let her make mistakes while making sure those mistakes did not destroy her. In return, Emily and Scout brought life back into Michael's cabin in humiliating little ways. Scout stole one of Michael's socks every Tuesday with the devotion of a tiny criminal. Emily taped a grocery list to his refrigerator because a man could not live on black coffee, canned beans, and whatever old warriors called protein. Walt started coming by for supper, then Sarah, then Nora with a dog that needed socializing, and sometimes May arrived with pie and the frightening announcement that she had made too much, a lie everyone accepted for the sake of civilization. Michael complained that his home had become a train station with fur. But one evening, when Emily caught him standing on the porch listening to Scout bark joyfully at nothing, there were tears on his face and no shame in them. "Ranger would have liked him," he said. Emily touched his sleeve, not his hand, and answered, "Scout would have followed Ranger anywhere." Michael looked toward the dark pines, and for the first time the name of the dog he had lost did not sound like a grave closing. It sounded like a door opening. Months passed. Brandon pleaded not guilty, then changed his plea when the evidence multiplied against him like wolves at the tree line. The court set restitution for the fraud, the false report charge stuck, and the reckless endangerment case moved forward with enough weight that Calvin Merritt stopped appearing on local news and began looking smaller in every hallway photograph. Emily attended one hearing, then no more. Sarah told her justice did not require her to bleed at every step, so Emily chose the living work. By early winter, she and Scout were certified for volunteer search and rescue support. The first snow of the season fell soft and almost beautiful, but Emily still woke before dawn with her heart hammering. For a moment, she was back in the ditch. Then Scout climbed onto the bed, all 70 pounds of him now, and dropped his heavy head across her ribs like a warm sandbag with opinions. She laughed through the fear, which did not make the fear vanish, but made it smaller. 2 weeks later, the call came. A 7-year-old boy named Caleb Miller had gone missing near a trail outside town after wandering from his father during a family hike. Caleb was small for his age, with dark curly hair, a red parka, and a habit of chasing birds because he believed they knew secret paths. His father, Aaron Miller, a tired school mechanic with oil-stained hands, a square face and terror carved into every line around his eyes, stood at the search staging area looking like a man whose soul had left ahead of him into the woods. Emily saw him and understood with terrible clarity what waiting could do to a body. Michael was there as a part of the volunteer team, calm as stone. But when the coordinator asked who would run the Creekside sector, he looked at Emily, not to command her, but to ask without words if she was ready. Snow dusted the trees. The air smelled of pine, metal, and memory. Emily clipped Scout's searchline to his harness. Her hands shook once, then steadied. "Find him," she whispered. Scout lowered his nose and moved, not wildly, not like a pet chasing excitement, like a worker entering a sacred duty. He crossed the trail, circled near a fallen log, then pulled hard toward a narrow gully where the wind carried scent low and strange. Emily followed, boots sinking, breath visible, Michael several yards behind, and silent. The forest thickened. Branches scratched her coat. For one moment, the slope, the snow, the fading light all folded together and became that other night. Her chest tightened. Scout stopped, looked back at her, and gave one short bark. Not fear, reminder. Emily breathed. "I'm here," she said, and moved on. They found Caleb tucked beneath the roots of a fallen spruce, shivering, crying without sound, one mitten missing, red parka bright against the white like the cloth Michael had once seen on the branch. Emily dropped to her knees. "Hi, Caleb. I'm Emily. This is Scout. Your dad sent us." The boy blinked at the dog first because children know angels when angels wear fur. Scout crawled close and pressed his warm body against Caleb's side while Emily wrapped him in the emergency blanket from her pack. A year before, she had used her own coat to save Scout. Now, she used what she had learned to save a child. When the team carried Caleb back and Aaron Miller fell to his knees around his son, the whole forest seemed to exhale. Michael stood behind the others, snow in his dark hair, gray-blue eyes shining. He did not say he was proud. He did not need to. Emily saw it. Scout leaned against her leg, tail wagging once as if signing the report himself. Later, as dusk turned the snowfields blue, Emily looked down the white road leading back toward town. Once a road like that had been the place where she was abandoned. Now it had become the path she walked to bring someone else home. She slipped her hand into Scout's fur and smiled, not because winter was harmless, but because it no longer owned her. The storm had chosen her once. This time she chose the storm back and turned it into a way home. Sometimes God does not send help with thunder, angels, or a voice from the clouds. Sometimes he sends an old pickup through a snowstorm, a tired man with a wounded heart, and a little dog brave enough to keep loving when the world has turned cold. Emily thought that road was where her life would end, but God turned it into the place where her life began again. Scout was not just a puppy in the snow. He was a reminder that love can survive in the smallest, weakest body and still be strong enough to lead someone home. In our own lives, we may all face a night when we feel forgotten, betrayed, or left behind. But please remember this: the storm is not always the end of the road. Sometimes it is the place where grace finds us. Sometimes the very pain that tried to break us becomes the path that teaches us how to save someone else. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and whether you have ever seen an animal become a blessing in someone's life. And if you believe God still works through kindness, courage, and loyal hearts, please subscribe to the channel so we can walk through more stories like this together. May God bless you, protect your family, comfort every lonely heart, and guide every lost soul safely home.